Welcome back to Get the Check. I'm Maya.
I'm Monica.
I'm Vidushi.
I'm Priya.
And today's episode is on Palantir. Palantir was founded back in 2003 by Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and a couple others, and they specialize in data analytics and integration. So they have a couple of products. One is called Palantir Gotham, and this is primarily used for defense and intelligence applications. And Palantir Foundry, their other product, is more catered towards commercial clients. Before we get started on their products, though, I want to take a step back to their founding.
Yeah, so Palantir got started in a post 9/11 world where we had just firsthand seen that we have these massive amounts of data, but it's so spread out. And in this case, it was spread out across like a bunch of different government organizations. And there were no tools to actually go in, analyze it, and connect the dots. And so this was seen as one of the reasons for the failure to prevent this terrorist attack. And that's how Palantir got its start working with the government. And they were also funded by the CIA's In-Q-Tel, which is their not-for-profit venture capital arm.
Peter Thiel is also a huge libertarian, which I find really funny because he ends up creating the future of the United States government surveillance state, which is the least libertarian thing ever. Regardless, it's really impressive what the product is. They started with the CIA as their first customer, not just their first investor, and they expanded from there to different parts of the government as well.
Yeah, and it's crazy what it's grown into today. When we look at their most recent earnings call, they've achieved a 30% year-over-year increase in revenue and also had strong guidance, so they're clearly doing well.
Yeah, and with software, there's the rule of 40, and that's basically a simple addition of a company's revenue growth plus their profit margin. As a company, you want to prioritize growth, but you can't just dump endless money into growth at the expense of profitability. So this equation is a really simple way to see if a company is achieving a balance and able to get to a good overall percentage. Palantir's turned it on its head because their year-over-year revenue growth, like Priya said, is 30, plus their operating margin is 38, so they're at 68%.
Yeah, another way to measure a company's performance is through their PE ratio, which is a price to earnings ratio. And this specifically measures the market's valuation of a company compared to their earnings. Palantir's PE ratio right now is at 310, which is insane. It's the highest in the entire stock market.
Google's is like 21, and usually software companies are around 40. They break just like every rule of 40 there is, I guess.
Yeah, the last time we saw PE ratios this high, they were hovering around 100 to 200. That was back in the dot-com bubble burst. And so people are skeptical of this PE ratio being so high and might start shorting Palantir because of their recent growth. So we'll just have to wait and see.
I was thinking about if there's anything to justify how high it is. Generally, what justifies a high PE ratio is a lot of confidence in future growth, which I could see. They're in an emerging sector like data. They are profitable now. They have a powerful network effect because they're using AI and data in their products. None of these are super unique, though. I feel like there's a lot of companies that applies to. The one unique reason I could come up with is that the company's really deep integration into government operation systems almost makes them too big to fail, similar to like JP Morgan in 2007. You could make an argument that Palantir is the key to us staying cutting edge in the military, and therefore the entire world order is to some degree dependent on Palantir. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but that was like the best justification I could come up with for such an insane PE ratio.
I want to paint a picture through another metric. That's at their expected value to sales ratio, which is trading at 55x. So this basically means if all of Palantir's revenue was after tax profits and paid out as dividends, it would take 55 years to get your investment back. Imagine if someone came up to you and they were like, hey, buy a piece of my company. In 55 years, you'll get that same value back, assuming no growth.
Yeah.
Right? That's crazy. And so that's why you price and growth when you look at these multiples. But 55 years, what do they say? They say you double your money every 7 years.
If you just put $100 in the market, it's $200 in how many years?
In 7 years. Yeah. I would say there's probably going to be a correction in their stock at some point.
But some of Palantir's top equity research that have followed it for the last 10 years have just raised the price target by $20 per share. So I do see your guys' point, but I think on the flip side, there's a lot of people that understand their business really well that not only think it's worth this much, but worth more. The reasoning they gave was really centered around growth.
I guess, do we think that they'll sustain that growth? There's an analyst saying that the share price will hit 80 by the end of the year. And sure, that might be correct, but will they be able to sustain that over the next 2 to 3 years? Well, Maybe this is enough finance talk since none of us are qualified to talk about this. But.
Speak for yourself. I was in Morgan Stanley's equity research team for a few weeks.
She actually had an offer to be a banker that she didn't take.
That's true, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about my sophomore summer days.
Cool. Let's move on to their products. So just to give you an overview on the products, there's Palantir Gotham that we said before. This is the intelligence and defense tool that's used by the militaries and counterterrorism analysis to go and understand the data out there about maybe like adversary troop movements and then make decisions off of that and actions off of that. Next, we also have Palantir Foundry, which is similar to Gotham except for the commercial customers. So again, you can think of this as a platform to take actions on the data that you understand. And then finally, we have Palantir Apollo, which is the CI/CD service.
It's the infrastructure that delivers Gotham and Foundry to people to be able to run it in any kind of environment and from anywhere, so even a submarine.
Yeah. They recently announced Palantir AIP, which is integrating large language models into Foundry as well as, I believe, Gotham. The idea is that you're able to use the pre-built AI products and custom build your own AI products on top of the Foundry application.
All of these products come together to form Palantir's mission, which is an idea the CTO talks about a lot, that the truth is out there. The truth is basically in all your data points, and Palantir brings them all together and creates a clear picture so that you can find that truth. You might have a business question like, why are Uber drivers not retained as well as they were the quarter before? Obviously, the truth is out there. There's a reason, but there's all these different data points. It could have to do with their personal lives. It could have to do with the city you're in. It could have to do with the demand from riders. And before, there were probably different teams looking at each of those things, trying to come to a conclusion. There's probably a lot of assumptions. And Palantir's idea is we bring all these data points into one place and come up with a truth. And we're seeking truth.
I think that part of Palantir's mission is non-unique. Any business data analytics platform is trying to find truth and trying to uncover more trends in the data that they didn't understand before. Specifically, though, with Foundry and Gotham, they add an extra layer of the ability to take action. Palantir is not just trying to be the data analytics provider, but also trying to be the platform that performs these actions. So they see business decisions as three parts: data, logic, and actions. Data is like what you said, what are all the inputs into maybe the logic that I'm trying to run? So like in your case, the driver's rides and their ratings, for example, right? Logic is the business logic behind asking this question.
So the logic would be, I want to know why drivers are being retained at a lower rate than the previous quarter.
Exactly. And then there's a final layer of action. Now, like, what is the step that I can take to retain my drivers further? And can I do that in the system? Foundry is the application layer allowing you to do those actions. So maybe that's manifested through sending emails to your driver if you're recognizing that this driver is becoming uninterested.
Cool, so let's dive into how all of those Palantir products work together in a real life example. So one of their customers is Airbus, and this is the type of industry that Palantir tends to work with, where it's not necessarily tech, but there's still a lot of data and a lot of complexity involved.
So something very crucial to the way that Palantir organizes this complex data is what they call the ontology layer. So what the ontology layer really does is it models all different objects in real life as data, or it takes the database representations of those in these client systems and finds all the connections between these different objects. So in the context of Airbus, for example, you have a plane. A plane has wings, it has an engine. That engine is made of parts. Now those parts are replaced maybe once a day or once a year, and those parts are delivered to you in deliveries. So for example, in this case, in the ontology layer, you would have a representation of a plane, of a part, of a delivery, and of a crew working on the plane. And so you're really trying to connect all these different models or objects together to find synergies so that you can go and ask more questions. And so they spend a lot of their initial setup time what they call ontologizing the data, meaning just creating a digital representation of your entire organization, also known as the digital twin.
Yeah, and without ontology, all of this data would stay siloed. And so by connecting it all together, you get that picture that maybe you have in your mind, or maybe you have in all of these different areas. But before Palantir, there wasn't necessarily a way to understand how each little tiny piece impacts the next.
So in the Airbus example, how do the different products connect together? Like the idea of Foundry, and then there's Apollo, and then when you zoom out a little bit more, it's also connected to the artificial intelligence platform.
So Foundry basically acts as the brain. So we just went over what ontology is. And so now with Foundry, you actually organize and analyze all the data that you were able to put together before. So you pull in all of this information from different sources like flight sensors, engineering logs, or schedules, and that's all integrated into one place, which is Foundry.
And it's crazy how much data there is, because I was looking at it, and an A350, which is the type of plane that they were working on in the beginning of this partnership, has 5 million parts, hundreds of teams, 4 different countries where it's manufactured, and 8 plants. I can barely conceptualize how much data that would be.
Yeah. And I think the cool part about Foundry is that it not only shows you all of this data and how it's all connected, but it also tells you what to do with it, which is the benefit that Palantir is providing.
Something that Palantir does with their Foundry platform, and specifically their ontology layer, is that they're able to reuse data for decisions that you wouldn't normally think of. So for example, you have a plane, it has an engine, and you're trying to figure out, do I need to service this engine faster? So normally you use 20,000 flight miles as a benchmark to service this engine. Now you're using sensor data potentially, but also the ontology layer is showing, hey, we normally use this sensor data to, maybe land the plane or to make sure that the plane needs an emergency landing. But the sensor data is also useful for other things. It's useful for the maintenance schedule. And so really what they're doing is they're reusing data from other parts of the system to inform these decisions. That's where the power of the ontology layer comes into play, is that you can trace very long connections, and you can see the cause and effect through that very long chain between all these objects.
And AIP builds on top of any kind of AI operations that you would want to do. If you have developed a model that can predict the recurring maintenance of an engine or any kind of part, you can deploy and evaluate that model on their platform.
Yeah, so instead of the workflow having simple if-else conditions, you can now have a more generic AI model to make these decisions for you.
Right, exactly. And we even see from Palantir and Airbus saying that that type of predictive maintenance has reduced downtime by 20 to 30%, and they have cost savings of greater than $1.7 billion annually.
What are you guys' thoughts on if this level of ontology is necessary for all companies?
I think that for tech companies, it may not make as much sense because you have so many technical people in that company who are able to understand the data and ontologize it themselves.
Yeah, I think that's why we see that they don't have a lot of partnerships with larger technical organizations, because they could use something more simple like Databricks, for example, and build out the system themselves.
Yeah, the types of companies that work with them make a lot of sense. It's either companies that have a big supply chain, for example, BP or different healthcare companies, or it's companies with really large amounts of data and more legacy systems like big banks. Like I think JP Morgan's a partner.
Yeah, in those organizations, all of these different company functions are siloed off into their own teams. So for example, you have your marketing team, and you have your engineering team, and your data team, and then your customer service team. Because you don't really have engineers as the backbone of your company, you don't have a way to feed all your inputs into one place. And so with ontology, you're able to put all your inputs into one location, and then the business people can view this as what they call a single pane of glass into your company. So you're just able to see all of the different data that you have from all of these different departments and see how they all come together.
I also do see the point though of that if that becomes super complex, it may become difficult for Palantir and that business to be able to maintain. If you decide to go with a different supplier, now you're getting completely different types of data.
I actually think that having Palantir would make it easier, not more difficult, because you're able to seamlessly integrate it back into the platform and then see exactly how that impacts the other nodes that maybe you didn't consider. And it's oh, I can actually optimize this workflow now because we have this new supplier that can ship faster than my old supplier, for example, or something like that. And so I think those little optimizations you can actually get out of a platform like Palantir as opposed to running it on your own.
Yeah, and previously, if you were to switch out an engine supplier, you didn't even know what the downstream effects of switching out that engine supplier was. Now you're actually aware of that. I think half of the battle is understanding who you're even affecting in the first place.
It's also just having a model where you can make a change without making it in real life.
And you can predict it, because like you can say, what if I were to change my engine out? Would it actually help me?
Right.
The way they think about setting up the system for their customers is pretty unique, where it's like they want to make sure that they're always building in a very extensible way. So when they first go in and they sign a contract, they ask what's an action that you want to optimize or a business decision you want to make. And it might be like, okay, I want to increase production of my airplanes. And then they work that back and they figure out what's the data, the inputs, what are the rules, what is the business logic, and they build that. Then they go ask what's the next decision. But every time they do and help with the next business decision, it gets that much easier because they're making use of the old integrations. It's clear that they've been providing value to their customers as published in these case studies. But again, this system is very highly tailored per customer. And so they actually need forward deployed engineers to go and make all these integrations. So they need somebody to go and pipe all the data to Foundry, ontologize it, and then help the business people at the customer's company to make those decisions. Yeah. But yeah, I want to dig more into their forward deployed engineer concept a little bit.
So like we mentioned earlier, a lot of their companies don't have engineers in tech as the backbone of the company. So Palantir actually has engineers that integrate their entire software into their customers. And this role is called a forward deployed engineer. They work directly with customers, they implement Palantir software, and they also help solve the complex problems the customers coming to Palantir with.
Yeah, and the idea here is that if they have someone integrated with this customer from the beginning, they are very hands-on in the beginning, but then you have everything set up so that long term they can kind of like take a step back and see exponential returns from what they've put in place at the very beginning.
It kind of reminds me of Accenture's tech consultants that integrate software with different companies. Even though the software isn't Accenture's, it's like the same role basically.
I think that is what makes it unique though, is that for tech consulting, they're using someone else's product to plug into some businesses' processes, but this one is Palantir's own product. So as they're setting it up for someone, they get a immediate product feedback loop and they're able to improve on their own product while they're setting it up for their customer.
Yeah, the other thing I would say about the differences between tech consulting and what Palantir is doing is like similar to the analogy of like you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you teach a man how to fish, you feed him for an entire lifetime. And I find that similar to what Palantir is doing, where in tech consulting, they ask you a question and you like do all this research to go answer that. But that research is like utilized for basically that one business decision. But in Palantir's sense, because you have Foundry as a platform that is constantly being iterated on, you continue to use that platform that you've already done the work on and the data that you've already done the due diligence on to go and like make these decisions that much faster. So they really talk about like the economies of scale when they talk about Foundry, is that like every next decision that you make should be that much cheaper to make.
Yeah, I feel like it's like you teach a man how to fish for a lifetime. The man's the company. But Palantir is like the fishing pole, and they can't use any other fishing pole ever again after that. And there's like a yearly contract fee to use the pole.
Yeah. Another big controversy is that the forward deployed model is like not very scalable. So traditionally in tech, as the number of customers that use that product grows exponentially, the number of engineers that it takes to maintain that product should only grow linearly. But in this case, in Palantir's model, it's like, okay, as we get more customers, we still need that many more engineers. So the number of customers and the number of engineers are growing linearly together. And so
that's like the number one rule in SaaS, is that you're not supposed to make it super custom for every customer. You want to make it one size fits all.
Yeah.
Into this.
And they've basically had this hypothesis for like 10 years. And I feel like we're finally seeing the result of that hypothesis based on their operating margins.
I think that the forward deployed model makes a lot of sense when we're talking about government contracts, especially because we're seeing that these government contracts are worth a lot more. But as they're going into enterprises, I think they are maybe going to have to rethink this forward deployed model, because unless they're having one forward deployed model to multiple enterprises, it doesn't seem like they will now or later be able to hit the economies of scale that they've been able to accomplish in the government sector.
Yeah, like if we look at the average contract value in the US commercial segment, it's around $500K, which is the equivalent to like 1.5 engineering salary. Yeah. But then if you look at that at the government level, it's like 4 to 5 million. And you see the actual operating margin split be reflective of that. So we don't have like the most recent operating margin split, but in previous earnings report, we've seen a 20% operating margin for the commercial side and a 38% operating margin for the government side.
Yeah, and something that they've said in these earning calls is like, we really care about the quality of the customers we have. Like, it's okay if we don't have a ton of customers. And I think that that's worked really well for them in these government fields. I just don't see that continuing on as well in the enterprise sector.
Well, I mean, I think we've been able to see that their profit margins have increased, so that probably means they're able to keep their operating cost around the same for at least the larger contracts and be able to scale that business larger.
So yeah, in the U.S. commercial customer segment, we've seen a 77% year-over-year growth in number of customers. So my guess is like there has to be some sort of customer acquisition strategy play here where like the initial contract sizes might be low just to entice the customer to sign. And then once, they prove value, they might start upping those prices. But then because it's such a core part of your system, you wouldn't leave as a customer. You would still find it valuable to have Palantir there. So they're probably trying to make it more accessible to like smaller companies. And then grow with those companies, if that makes sense. Like imagine one of the smaller companies that they partner with, but they believe is like high growth, then that will manifest in like high growth in that contract value. We don't know though if that's actually the case. We don't have that kind of granularity of data.
Yeah, I think their commercial strategy has gotten a lot better. You might remember in 2023, their stock was down 60%. And I think part of the reason was the year before they used a pay for revenue strategy where they basically invested in a bunch of SPACs and then...
Wait. What are SPACs? I'm just saying this for the listeners because I recently learned what a SPAC was. But
we were having a little discussion on Sunday.
My mind was blown when I heard it.
Yeah, so a SPAC is basically when investors have a shell company that goes public and then they look for the actual company after it's already public.
Oh, like what do you mean by look for an actual company?
They like literally look for a company the same way a VC looks for a company to invest in. So they do like a sourcing process.
So like 5 people come together and are like, oh, I have a bunch of money, like I'm gonna go buy you and you'll automatically be public.
Yeah, basically Chamath comes and essentially, yeah. And then on the other side of the equation, there's startups that for some reason don't want to go IPO in a traditional way. The reason for this might be as benign as an IPO process is long because there's a lot of
and like so many regulations.
Yeah, there's a lot
loopholes.
of audit, yeah.
And there's other reasons as well. For example, if you're a biotech company or in some emerging sector, you might feel like your valuation is a lot higher and you're ready to IPO, whereas investors may not think so, and like banks don't want to take you public.
Oh.
And so how was Palantir involved in that?
They decide to start investing in these SPACs, which are basically startups, but they're public. They put $400 million in, there's over 20 startups, and then they write into the contracts of their investment that these customers or startups have to use Palantir, even though like we talked about before, the typical customers of Palantir are like a BP or a DoD, and obviously these SPAC companies that are like biotech companies, they're not the typical customer profile in terms of industry or size.
Yeah. This is just their way of increasing both like commercial customer count and profit margins because you don't actually have to report your investment as like a loss on your margin. And so you can just say like, oh, I just made all this revenue and it didn't cost me that much besides the engineering labor to do so.
Yeah.
Like after this news came out in 2022, like the stock kept plummeting after that because people realized like, hey, this is like not a normal business practice. They're inflating their numbers artificially.
But yeah, I would say zooming out from their scam, just kidding. It was like a semi-scam. But their transition into commercial has actually gone better than people thought it would. Like
Oh, and even like 54% of their customers are government contracts. The rest of them are all commercial. So they've definitely grown the business significantly.
Yeah, but getting back to my earlier point, though, I'm concerned about their operating margins in the commercial segment. I mean, if you look at Tata Consulting, it's around 20%, or even the Big Four in general is also around 15 to 30%. And so they're operating similarly to that, but they're getting like SaaS multiples on the market.
Yeah, I could see operating margins in the commercial space increasing, though, because, for example, in their partnership with BP, they've saved over $1 billion for BP from optimizing BP's drilling through sensors and creating a digital twin, which is like the ontological model that basically allows BP to monitor oil and gas better in real time. And there's like over 2 million sensors being used right now. And this is before BP even started using the AI like platform. So I would say that if they can prove literally billions in money saved for their commercial clients, then I see a future where they could increase their operating margins.
Yeah, I think the dark horse in this whole narrative is how good AIP is. So I think in our last episode, if you didn't listen, you should listen. We were talking about agentic AI, which is the idea that you now are not only just generating content, but you're having an AI bot doing an entire workflow for yourself that a human would do. And because the Foundry platform is connected to all of the inputs that this company has, they're kind of in the perfect place to deploy agentic AI. And they're also not only connected to the inputs, but they're also connected to things that produce outputs or things that take action. And so not only can this AI read the inputs, but also do the actions on behalf of all their engineers, business people, marketing folks, whoever. So some people have been saying that they're perfectly positioned for this next wave of AI and will capitalize on it. And the commercial segment will definitely eat this up and want to sign with Palantir.
Yeah, like this depth isn't something that we've seen before in a platform, and it seems like Palantir's getting there ahead of any of their competitors. So when we think about something that a human would typically need to do, like get on the phone with a supplier, now because we have all of this data and we have a layer of agentic AI on top of that, we have enough information for AI to actually replace this human in something like picking up a phone call and talking to a supplier more in depth than just what are the specs of this thing that I need. You can actually talk about timelines and deliveries and where it needs to be delivered and go super in depth into things that would typically require a human. And this is unlocking something that people haven't really been able to unlock yet.
Yeah, I think workflows are very common in industry where it's like, I know how to do this one thing very well. Like I know how to order this one part and it's like easy. Yeah. But things that are like, that could change day to day is something that agentic AI could be really helpful for because we know that AI's ability to adapt to the situation is unprecedented.
Yeah, super cool. It's really cool what they're doing. The one thing that we haven't touched upon yet, and something that's really core to Palantir as a company, is the ethics behind what they're doing.
A lot of people think their respect for civil liberties is a bit debatable considering some of the partnerships.
It's in the gutter.
They worked with multiple police departments on predictive policing, which is basically just bringing AI to how policing occurs. So the two big ones were they worked in New Orleans and in LA. And the way the city council found out that there was AI within the police departments that was using predictive policing for the last 6 years was through investigative journalists telling them.
Oh, wow. So they weren't even aware of this.
Yeah, so basically they've collected a variety of data. Some of it is things that do make sense in predicting crime, like criminal history, but then some of it is a little bit more peripheral. Like they looked at people's social media activity, they looked at airport data, they looked at field interviews, which is just like any interaction a police officer has with another person, regardless.
Like a body cam? Like that?
Yeah, it could be a body cam or just like notes.
Yeah, like literally they would have police taking notes, and a lot of the information that they were getting are things that typically police would need a warrant to get. And they even took it a level further. So with the LAPD, it was called Operation Laser, and basically they would actually give scores to LA residents. And so
that's like the Black Mirror episode where you score your interaction with people.
Literally, except instead of a social media score, it's a high-risk individual score.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so then once an individual had accrued like a high enough score from either negative police interactions or because they were affiliated with people that had previously had a record or whatever it may be, officers were actually encouraged in LA to just go up to their door, knock on the door, and tell them that they were being monitored.
So like because of this high-risk score, they're like going to these neighborhoods, trying to arrest these people, being successful. And so then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. And I think that to give some light to the other side, people that are pro this, they would probably say, have you shown that the arrests that were made were actually of innocent people? And I think that there isn't evidence that granular. There is more big picture evidence that in poor neighborhoods there's a higher amount of arrests and that those aren't all people that have like actually done something so bad, right? But in specifically Palantir's culpability, if you take an area and you monitor it a ton and then feed all that data, even something as small as just stopping someone on their way home, right, into the system, obviously then that generates, oh, that's a high risk neighborhood, you've talked to so many people there, you should monitor it even more closely, and then they make more arrests, which then books the neighborhood as even more dangerous. And
it's when you don't monitor the neighborhoods equally is when you're getting this bias that occurs.
Exactly.
And also like the police interactions are biased themselves and are reflective of like racial bias and gender bias.
Exactly. And obviously every neighborhood shouldn't be policed the exact same, and there are neighborhoods where there's more and less crime, but a lot of the data they were using, like social media profiles, no one even knew they were using this. Like people have a right to know what data of yours the government is using.
Yeah, so ultimately both the LAPD and the New Orleans Police Department ended their contracts with Palantir, and this came after criticism from a bunch of different activist groups and the department's own civil oversight panel. So basically, once they found out about all of this happening, they were like, we need to shut this down immediately.
It's crazy it went on for over half a decade, though.
Palantir was also doing this pro bono, which is another crazy thing.
Is it?
Oh, they were?
Palantir was like, oh, like maybe it would be fun to use the same strategy we used on Osama Bin Laden on like innocent LA civilians. Like that's
and I think that's where the argument of like this technology isn't inherently bad, it's just being used wrongly kind of falls apart.
Because it's like they weren't even getting money from this.
They weren't getting money from it. They were very aware of what they were doing and they were keeping it on the DL.
Yeah, like if you think it's so protective of civil liberties, why does it take 10 investigative journalists to uncover this?
Yeah, because I actually agree with the point that technology isn't inherently bad. I think there's so many technologies out there that can be used for evil, that can be used for bad. That doesn't mean that the creators of that technology are bad. I just think where Palantir draws the line is very icky.
I mean, because they're enforcing like actionable decisions from this data, right? So does that put them at fault for knowing about what's happening with this data?
I guess it gets to the broader point, which I don't really have a stance in, is like, is it on the engineers or each individual person working on this project to also take a stand and stand against it? I personally would say no. Like,
I would also say no.
It's like a top-down kind of culture, and it's on the leadership.
Yeah, I definitely think it's on the company. Like when the top leadership sets kind of a stance of what that company stands for. I mean, the individual employee can't really take actions or make decisions about what kind of business that company is doing.
And the employees actually did take a stand, which I find really interesting. Another one of their huge controversies is their $42 million contract with ICE. In 2018, Trump implemented his zero tolerance policy for illegal immigration, which basically involved separating families at the border in order to deter more people from crossing. So if there was a family at the border of like parents and a kid or two kids, they would take the parents and put them in a different place than the kids. And some of those families like have not been reunited to this day. Like those parents never saw their kids again. And basically during that time, over 200 Palantir employees wrote to Karp. And at that time, there were like 2,400 employees total. So 200 employees signing on to something is really big. Yeah. Especially considering all those employees knowingly joined a company that primarily works with like the CIA and the military. So with that context, I don't think these are people that are like all at the forefront of social justice.
I think in the ICE example, it became so evident and heartbreaking that you can see firsthand what you're doing. I think a lot of the time with the military, things are happening overseas and you know what's happening, but you don't really see it in the way that it was seen with the ICE case. And I think that's why it garnered so much more attention than some of the other things that they've done in the past.
I also think it's an escalation of policy. Like every administration does deportations, and deportations are going to ruin families. Obviously, it's not going to be that's not going to be something you can get rid of. But I think it's like when you escalate it, and then there's like so many videos on social media of like kids in court with like no representation. So the ICE situation ended similar to the predictive policing situation. Palantir still works with ICE, but there were lines that were drawn. I think with the next administration being back to Trump, and I don't think the policing thing was administration specific, but the ICE thing was a little bit administration specific.
Yeah.
And Palantir has really close ties with both the Democrats and the Republicans. It'll be interesting to see where the partnership goes. And I know it's been in the news a lot in terms of how the Trump administration will partner with Palantir.
Will like utilize Palantir's
Exactly.
Palantir software for their partnerships.
Yeah.
I think it only gets deeper and deeper integrated over time. I think Palantir is probably one of the most sticky products on the market, whether it's in a government sense or in an enterprise sense, that once they have their little fingers in you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's taken 21 years to get to this point.
Yeah.
So they've put in the work to make their product very sticky, because you don't just make a product sticky overnight. Like you have to get people signed on to, and it to be so core to your business that you can't operate without it.
Yeah. And Peter Thiel and Trump are boys. And
Besties.
yeah. So I feel like that has to have an impact. Also,
For sure.
a lot of what he's already said is all around like efficiency and like appointing people like Elon. So I feel like he would be very pro deepening the Palantir relationship, which is probably part of why the stock has done so well since.
Oh, because people know that Trump is going to support Palantir.
Yeah.
And, like,
I mean,
bring it into-
the government supports Palantir
Yeah,
because
right.
the government
Regardless of the
doesn't have
administration.
technology like that themselves. Like, they really heavily rely on Palantir.
Yeah, it's not a partisan issue. They both support working with Palantir, but I think the extent of the partnership is slightly partisan.
Yeah, I think that sums it up perfectly with Palantir being founded in 2003. It's been 21 years, and they've really taken the time to develop a platform very tailored to the government in order to make these data-driven decisions. And them now exploding in the commercial sector shows promising, especially with their AIP platform. So it'll be cool to see how they grow over the next 2 years, and if we're still doing a podcast by then. And maybe we can do a retro, and if our takes were correct.
Yeah, Palantir is an interesting company to track over time. I'm really curious to see what happens in the future.
Yeah, especially if their like stock collapses or if it explodes, and how their operating margins kind of change across both sectors.
Do people think it'll correct or keep going up?
I think it'll definitely correct.
Yeah.
I think it'll correct in the short term, but in the long term, Palantir will be a successful company.
Yeah, but I'm shorting on the correction in the next year.
You're shorting Palantir over the next year?
Yeah, I think it's like a long short. Like, I think that it could still rise, like, to 80, maybe even 100. But I think at some point you can't maintain the PE ratio, and there's no way they're growing. Like, they might match the same growth of 30% year over year, but that still doesn't warrant their PE valuation.
Yeah. So this week, we've decided to cancel Restaurant Pick of the Week.
Breaking news.
Oh, so sad.
I actually really liked this segment, but
I think it was
Why are
fun
we
for us,
canceling it?
and it wasn't fun for anyone else.
literally, the drop-off rate is insane. It's
Yeah.
astronomical.
It's astronomical.
Oh, wait, no, it's the opposite of astronomical.
Wait,
Yeah,
It's-
so
it
actually
plummets.
our retention
It's
in
plummeting.
finishing our episode has been really good, so love you guys for that. However, everyone X's out of it right before this segment, so I'm speaking to no one.
On that note, we'll see you next Thursday at 6 a.m.
We don't really know what our topic is, but
If you have any recs, drop it in the TikTok.
Oh yeah, drop it in the TikTok. Follow our TikTok, social media, at the Get the Check Pod, Instagram. Even you can follow my Twitter, mshawty.
Oh, personal.
I don't think we ever
Self-plug.
talked about plugging personal X's.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It's in the bylaws.
And please don't call it Twitter. Our chance of Elon ever coming on the pod is going to 0.
Yeah, DM us, Elon.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.